It's over, everyone. All Chinese internet stocks are crashing, and all assets priced in yuan are plummeting. The most alarming part is that the offshore yuan exchange rate has hit 7.25. Some people may not understand the impact of this rate. Let me give you an example. Imagine a company valued at 10 billion US dollars. As the yuan depreciates, in the eyes of foreign investors, that company's value appears to shrink. So what was once worth 10 billion US dollars might now look like 9 billion. Exchange rate fluctuations significantly affect how foreign investors value our assets. You can see that while the A shares only dipped slightly over the past couple of days, look at the Hong Kong market, which has a high proportion of foreign investment. It's in a complete nosedive. Can't anything be done to control the exchange rate? If it continues to drop, we're in serious trouble.
Following Trump's recent win, the Republicans have taken the Senate and the House too. This unexpected sweep has kept the market capitals excited. Trump publicly promised to raise tariffs on imports. He plans to impose a 60% tariff on Chinese imports and a 10 to 20% tariff on products from other countries. If this policy takes effect, it could spark another trade war. Specifically, in the electric vehicle sector, Chinese manufacturers have been competing through low-price dumping. Trump has stated he'll impose a 100 to 200% tariff on Chinese EVs, which would apply not only to cars imported directly from China, but also to Chinese brands made in Mexico. Back in late September, the Biden administration raised tariffs based on Section 301 of the Trade Act, already imposing a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, continuing Trump's tariff policy. When Trump takes office again, these tariffs might even expand. Experts suggest the yuan would face immense pressure, needing to drop by at least 50% to counteract the effects of these tariffs. Senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and former chief economist of the Institute of International Finance, Robin Rooks, analyzed that if Trump enacts these tariffs, Chinese authorities may feel compelled to devalue the yuan to offset economic pressure. In 2018, when the U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on half of its Chinese imports, the yuan depreciated by about 10% against the dollar, effectively counterbalancing the tariff impact. This kept the prices of U.S. imports in dollars stable, minimizing inflation before the COVID-19 pandemic. If a 60% tariff is imposed on all Chinese imports, the yuan might need to depreciate by 50% to stabilize the export prices to the U.S. Citibank earlier estimated that if tariffs rise to 60%, the yuan might need to fall to 8.3%. These predictions are certainly alarming. And these aren't guesses by amateur analysts. They come from serious experts. In the week following the election, the yuan swiftly dropped by over 1,000 points, approaching the 7.3 mark. It's terrifying. The yuan has plunged by over 1,000 points. What's going on? Is the money we're holding about to lose even more value? This affects everyone's wallets. Recently, the dollar to yuan exchange rate fell sharply, from 7.09 to 7.25, a drop of over 1,000 points. The U.S. election concluded, and Trump is back, which not only devaluates the yuan, but could seriously impact domestic prices. Some Chinese commenters believe that the U.S. is forcing the yuan to devalue as a way to sanction China, and worse could be on the horizon.
The yuan's drop? Is that surprising? With Trump back, the yuan is bound to fall. He's imposed a 60% tariff. America's plan is all laid out. They hiked the tariff, making it tough for China to export, which in turn pressures the yuan to devalue. And when the yuan weakens, its global standing drops, making it hard to use in international trade. This is part of a coordinated U.S. strategy to sanction China. Exporters will suffer, but it's not about the exports. Next year's Chinese New Year might be the hardest one yet. With Trump fully in office by January 20th, imposing a 60% tariff, how will we get through it? After New Year's, will there even be work? This will be a Chinese New Year to remember for a lifetime. By then, exchange rates may be the least of our concerns.
Since Trump's win, a noticeable pattern of options trading has emerged in the markets, especially for bullish dollar options, betting on a stronger dollar. A lot of these trades involve key currencies like the yuan and the euro. According to the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, DTCC, the euro to dollar and dollar to yuan options contracts have been especially active. with the dollar to yuan call options trading at a nominal value of at least $100 million. For every 2 put options on the yuan, there are 3 call options, indicating a clear trend among investors betting on yuan depreciation. In fact, as early as September, the international use of the yuan had already slowed, with a sharp drop in its share of global payments. But following Trump's victory, the trend has intensified. A report by SWIFT on October 31st showed that the yuan's share of global payments dropped to 3.61% in September, a 1.08 percentage point decline from the previous month, ending a 10-month streak where it held over 4%. Since the Chinese government began promoting the yuan's international use, and following the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war, which led to Russia's exclusion from the dollar system, the use of the yuan has surged. Since November 2023, the share of international payments in yuan has remained above 4% for 10 consecutive months. However, this upward trend noticeably slowed in September this year. According to a SWIFT report, the yuan dropped to the 5th most active currency for global payments by value, falling 1 rank among international currencies. The US dollar still leads with a 47.01% share, although it dropped by 2.06 percentage points. The euro follows with 22.56%, up by 0.98 points, and the British pound at 7.4%, up by 0.91 points. The Japanese yen at 4.3%, up by 0.29 points. Meanwhile, the yuan's overall transaction value fell by 24% from August, and the total payment amounts across all currencies declined by 0.67%. The U.S. election has also triggered a wave of transactions aiming to benefit from a stronger dollar. Neeraj Athavale, head of global client sales and marketing for Asia Pacific at JP Morgan Singapore, noted that following the election results, many forex traders in Asia are considering using options to bet on a stronger dollar, particularly against a euro, yen, and offshore yuan. In response to the impending wave of sanctions, the U.S. government has taken a rare step. Recently, they announced that, starting in 2023, all citizens will have 2 additional days of public holiday, 1 day each for the Chinese New Year and Labor Day. Some observers believe there's more to this than just extra days off. One commentator said,
Just heard the news, 2 extra holidays in 2025, but it's not that simple. What's the real reason behind this? Is it really just about giving everyone 2 more days off? Not exactly. This move aims to boost domestic demand, signaling the beginning of new policies to stimulate internal consumption. And this is only one step. More actions are likely to follow. Another point worth considering is how some European countries, especially the more developed ones, handle high unemployment by increasing holidays. Take Italy, for instance, where nearly half the year is holiday time. So when unemployment rises, they add more holidays and unemployment improves. The thinking behind this policy deserves some deeper consideration.
Others think this rare holiday extension reflects the government's focus on stimulating domestic demand. The Chinese government seems aware that, following this election, they may face further sanctions, making it unsustainable to rely on exports and foreign investment for economic growth. Instead, the future likely depends on domestic consumption carrying the weight of China's economy. This suggests the Chinese government fully grasps the shifts in the international landscape, understanding that the upcoming 60% tariffs are the U.S.'s response to China's long-standing unfair trade practices. These tariffs are not intended to hinder China's development, but to address trade imbalances, particularly the U.S.'s long-standing trade deficit with China. According to a Voice of America report, in September, bipartisan leaders of a special House committee on China urged the administration to take action against China's unfair trade practices. On September 25th, John Molinar, chairman of the House Select Committee on the CCP, spoke at an event organized by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. He argued that, due to China's long-standing practice of heavily subsidizing industries to gain a global advantage,
we see them pick a national champion, heavily subsidize that, try and drive competitors out of the marketplace through, unethical and illegal practices. And we've seen that. It's, the concerns are areas like semiconductors. I come from the Michigan, the automotive industry is very concerned about this. And our policies need to reflect that reality, that we've seen that with telecommunications and other areas.
Molinar emphasized,
we need to reset that relationship.
The committee's lead Democrat, Raja Krishnamurthy, strongly agreed with Molinar and further expressed support for the strategic shifts on Chinese goods.
They basically produce a heck of a lot more stuff, whether it's glass, paper, steel, or even electric vehicles today, than their internal demand would require. Then they export that overcapacity at prices designed to undercut the competition and destroy the competition. Let's be very frank about this. And we see this, for instance, with electric vehicles, where they're exporting these BYD vehicles all over the planet at prices that don't come close to the cost of actually manufacturing one of those things. And so what we have to do is we have to do strategic tariffing, among other things. This is a policy that Donald Trump adopted and Joe Biden has continued, and I would continue to support it. I think the next administration, whoever it's going to be, will continue it as well. But you have to do that because you have to protect our ability to innovate and to create jobs in those spaces. I believe in competition, but not dumping, not unfair competition.
Since China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, it has fundamentally reshaped the global trade system and geopolitical landscape. On one hand, China integrated deeply with the global economy, turning its manufacturing sector into the world's factory. On the other, it has not fully honored commitments in many areas, leveraging its growing economic size and expertise in WTO rules and dispute procedures to exploit the system's weaknesses for its benefit, gradually emerging as a significant force challenging global trade norms. An article in the Financial Times earlier this year noted growing complaints from Western manufacturers about China's unfair competition, when BYD, China's largest car manufacturer, announced a 5% to 15% price cut for EVs in Germany. Mercedes warned that its profits were under severe pressure from a brutal EV price war. The article also quoted analysts from FIM Partners, who highlighted that Beijing has spent the past 20 years driving emerging market competitors out of global manufacturing and now appears to be applying similar pressure on developed economies. A senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations observed that the US and the EU are facing a tough choice: either reduce reliance on Chinese goods or become dependent on China as a supplier of cheap products. As tariffs continue to mount, China appears to be grasping at ways to sidestep these trade rules. Illinois Democratic Representative Raja Krishnamurthy raised concerns about China's attempts to circumvent U.S. tariffs. He remarked,
"One thing that we are also seeing from the Chinese is that they're starting to try to evade the tariffs through things called transshipment, where they basically, let's take a BYD car, for instance. I'm not saying this happens, but it could happen, where they basically take that car and they basically take it to Mexico and then put a stamp on it in Mexico saying it was made in Mexico. And then it comes up through the USMCA into the United States, even though no value was really added in Mexico in making that car. Well, we got to prosecute that as a trade crime. And so we have introduced legislation along those lines. So we need, again, new tools to adapt to the situation as well.
This is also why Trump has applied 100% to 200% tariffs on EVs imported from China, including those made in Mexico under Chinese brands. Another loophole China exploits is the U.S. de minimis rule for low-value packages. In early September, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a package of 25 legislative measures related to China, focusing on advanced technology competition and national security. House Speaker Mike Johnson stated that, in addition to technology-related bills, the House will continue advancing measures to address issues with Chinese investments. House Select Committee on the CCP Chair, John Molinar, stated that he hopes the next step will be to close the loophole in the de minimis rule. Under the current U.S. regulations, packages valued under $800 can enter the country tax-free. Partisan lawmakers argue that this loophole allows Chinese manufacturers to avoid tariffs by mailing small parcels, leading to an influx of illegal and unsafe products into the U.S. U.S. Customs and Border Protection noted that over 1 billion of these packages entered the U.S. in fiscal year 2023. White House officials have also pointed out that the large number of small packages has increased fivefold in recent years, driven largely by the explosive growth of Chinese e-commerce platforms Shein and Temu. Molinar believes that the U.S. should implement an investment system that prevents funding companies linked to China's military or involved in human rights abuses. He argued that supporting such entities would be self-destructive, making this restriction a top priority. China will likely struggle to respond to Trump's trade war 2.0. After 3 years of strict COVID management, a collapsing real estate market, and weakened consumer confidence, exports are one of China's few remaining economic drivers. Commentator Wen Zhao remarked that the yuan's rapid depreciation could trigger a systemic reaction. Assets priced in yuan could devalue quickly, prompting a selling frenzy. Given the current lack of confidence in China's economy, such external pressure could lead to a collapse in China's credit system. The Chinese government's only option would be to slow the yuan's decline to avoid a sudden shock, opting for gradual losses instead. However, even gradual depreciation will be painful. Decisions on tariffs, how much and when, are entirely out of Beijing's hands, leaving China with limited options. An opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal echoed this, stating that Beijing's options are limited, particularly given the risk of excessive yuan depreciation. The report stressed that if China devalues its currency to cushion the impact of trade sanctions, it could accelerate capital flight. During 2015 and 2016, similar devaluation pressures led to significant capital outflows, causing foreign exchange reserves to plummet by at least $1 trillion. This time, regardless of Beijing's actions, it may place China's economy on a path of no return.